I said. "Kneel now." The command left Officer Trent Lawson's mouth a single second before he pulled the trigger and fired a round straight into Colonel Darius Hale's chest. That one shot would end Darius's life, destroy Lawson's career, expose years of buried corruption, and tear open the city that once trusted him. The impact drove Darius backward with a sharp, violent jolt. His uniform trembled under the force. His breath caught as pain cut through him. His 10-year-old son, Theo, recorded the moment with shaking hands because his father had taught him to film anything that felt wrong. The boy's voice broke into the air, thin and terrified, as the man who survived war collapsed in front of him on the asphalt of the hospital where he once saved lives. Before we continue this story, tell me where you are watching from. And if you believe these stories must be heard, subscribe to the channel and give me a like. What happened next changed America. Darius had arrived at the Jesse Brown Veterans Affairs that afternoon, wearing the uniform he had earned through decades of service. His weekly post-traumatic stress disorder group had asked every veteran to wear what you earned, and he agreed. He wanted to show Theo what pride looked like when it was carried with dignity. The boy walked beside him with an easy smile and the simple excitement of a child who had been promised chocolate milk after the meeting. Darius held his head high. He had fought for this country. He had saved 215 soldiers in Iraq. Today felt steady. Today felt safe. Lawson saw none of that. He pulled into the parking lot with the same suspicion that had guided him for years, suspicion sharpened by the night a black suspect shot him in the vest years earlier, suspicion reinforced by supervisors who erased complaints and taught him that fear could excuse anything. When his eyes locked on Darius, he did not see a veteran. He did not see a father. He saw a man in a uniform he believed did not belong to him. Theo reached for the car door when the police SUV stopped hard across their space. Lawson stepped out fast, hand on his weapon, posture tense. Darius raised both hands, calm and steady. He spoke with the clarity of a surgeon trained to stabilize chaos. "Colonel Darius Hale, retired. My Veterans Affairs identification is in my hand." He believed truth could settle the moment. He believed reason could reach the man in front of him. But Lawson did not even glance at the ID. "Turn around," he ordered. "On your knees." The words struck Darius deeper than the weapon now pointed at him. He had knelt on battlefields for dying soldiers. He had knelt for friends whose hands he held until their last breath. But he would not kneel in front of his son, not for suspicion, not for prejudice, not for a man who would not even look at him. Theo lifted his phone with trembling fingers. Darius had taught him to record every moment that felt unsafe. It was a lesson born of hard experience. The boy's breath shook as Lawson raised his voice again, louder, angrier, unable to see the man standing in front of him. Darius tried one last time, his voice steady. "Officer, my son is here. Let me explain." Lawson did not listen. His hand tightened. His fear twisted into force, and the single decision that would erase his life's work unfolded in a flash. The gun rose. The trigger moved. The bullet found its mark. Darius staggered. His body folded in pain. His hands twitched toward the wound, instinct fighting to save what could not be saved. Theo screamed his name. The phone shook violently as tears fell onto the screen. Darius tried to breathe through the pain. His eyes searched for his son with a tenderness that cut deeper than the wound itself. He opened his mouth, but the air escaped with a broken gasp. At that moment, Camilla Soto ran toward them from the ambulance bay. She had served as a combat medic in Iraq. She recognized Darius instantly. He was the man who held her femoral artery closed with his bare hands for 45 minutes outside Ramadi. the man who refused to let her die in the dust of a distant war. She dropped to her knees and pressed her hands against his wound, fighting for him as he once fought for her. She looked up at Lawson with a controlled fury. "You shot a colonel," she said. "You shot a father." Her voice carried a weight Lawson could not ignore. Theo leaned into her, sobbing, his small body shaking. Camila pulled him close, shielding his face from the blood pooling beneath his father. Darius struggled for breath. Every inhale a deeper cut. But even in those final seconds, his eyes held steady on his son. He lifted his hand barely, as if trying to offer comfort. Camila took his hand and held it firmly. She whispered, "You are not alone." The Veterans Affairs staff rushed toward them. Many knew Darius. Many had seen him counsel younger veterans, guide them through fear, remind them that life still had purpose. They gathered around him with urgency and grief. But the wound was too deep. The bullet had found a place beyond repair. Darius's breaths came shorter. His strength faded. Yet his gaze remained fixed on Theo. With his final breath, he tried to speak. The words barely formed, but they carried the weight of his life. "Take care of him." Camila nodded through tears. Theo cried into her shoulder, and the silence after his final breath felt heavier than anything the city had ever known. The boy lifted his father's dog tags with shaking hands. He held them to his chest. He whispered, "I will show them, Dad." His voice broke, but the conviction held. The recording in his hand kept running. The truth was preserved. The world would see it, and every shield that once protected Officer Trent Lawson began to crumble before the blood on Darius's uniform even cooled. The first sirens approached. None of them could undo what had been done. None of them could erase the single shot that tore through a man, a family, a city, and eventually a nation. Camila Soto uploaded the raw 42-second recording less than an hour after Darius died in her arms, and she did it with a steady hand because the world needed to see what she saw. And the caption carried the weight of her debt to him. "This is Colonel Darius Hale. He saved my life in Iraq. Chicago just murdered him in a Veterans Affairs parking lot." The video spread at a speed no one could contain. Within 1 hour, it reached veterans groups, military families, post-traumatic stress disorder support pages, and newsrooms that recognized the uniform before they recognized the face. Within 3 hours, it crossed 1 million views. By midnight, it reached 28 million, becoming the fastest-spreading police shooting video since the dawn of social platforms. People watched a father fall. People watched a decorated surgeon plead with his eyes. People watched a 10-year-old boy hold a phone with trembling fingers, whispering, "Dad, please breathe." The city felt the shift, as if a fault line had cracked beneath its feet. While the internet surged, Camila remained with Theo in a quiet corner of the Veterans Affairs, her hand on his shoulder, whispering steady reassurance, the same way Darius held her hand in Iraq when she was losing consciousness. She told the boy, "Your father was a great man. The world will know it." Across the street, Theo Rivera, an independent investigative journalist with a deep following in the Black community, arrived within minutes of seeing the video. He stepped in front of the Veterans Affairs entrance and went live, voice calm but charged with the gravity of what he had witnessed on the screen. Thousands joined his stream, then tens of thousands. Veterans poured out of the building behind him and spoke into his microphone one after another, saying Darius saved them, treated them, counseled them, stayed with them during dark nights when their minds worked like enemies. One man cried as he described how Darius talked him out of suicide in a hospital hallway. Another described how Darius stitched him together after an IED blast and then carried him to the medevac because the soldier could not walk. Their voices shaped the nation's first impression. and that impression was unshakable. The man killed on that pavement was not a threat. He was a protector. At Fort Knox, Colonel Elena Brooks received a trembling call from the Veterans Affairs nurse who had known Darius for years. The nurse spoke slowly, her words breaking. Elena sat down, hands clasped, and listened as she learned that her younger brother, the man she mentored through officer school, the man she protected from childhood adversity, the man she visited every month to help manage his post-traumatic stress disorder, had been shot without cause. She felt the air leave her chest. She did not cry. She stood, walked to her quartermaster locker, pulled out her uniform, and prepared to board the first military hop to Chicago. She called Theo's name 3 times before the boy answered. His voice was thin. She promised him she would be there soon. She promised him she would not let him be alone for a single hour. And she promised him she would stand for Darius when he could not. Inside Chicago Police Headquarters, the reaction took a different tone. Chief Donovan Briggs summoned his command staff and locked the doors behind them. His face carried no grief, no shock, only calculation. He issued a 48-hour media blackout and instructed the department's public information officer to release a single line: "Officer involved shooting." Suspect reached for his waistband. He knew it was false. He knew the truth was already online. Yet he clung to the old script, the one that protected him through a decade of scandals. He told the room, "We control the narrative or we lose the city." Captain Elias Crow, head of internal affairs, nodded without hesitation. He had buried 7 complaints against Lawson. He had erased video files, altered timestamps, and intimidated witnesses. Tonight, he prepared to do it again. He requested access to the Veterans Affairs footage. He drafted a preliminary report blaming Darius's sudden movement. He thought he had time. He did not. Down the hall, Detective Isabella Cruz, a woman who joined the force with hope and watched it erode year by year, sat alone at her desk reading the same false report. Briggs had approved. Cruz's stomach tightened as she scanned the words. She clicked open Lawson's internal case file, a file she had never seen in full because it had been restricted above her clearance. Tonight, access errors were failing under system overload. She clicked. The file opened. Dozens of pages appeared, then hundreds. She found 7 excessive force complaints across 5 years, all closed without discipline. She found internal emails from Captain Crow instructing subordinates to resolve without investigation. She found one complaint marked, "Witness recanted," though the witness's statement was still attached and directly contradicted the conclusion. And then Cruz found something worse, a copy of a civilian's letter stating that Lawson threatened her in a parking garage for speaking too loudly, a letter Crow had classified as frivolous and filed under misconduct exclusions that bypassed oversight. Cruz sat back in her chair and pressed her hand over her mouth. She had seen corruption. She had seen misconduct. But she had never seen a file this large, this deliberate, this brutal in its consistency. The shooting of Darius Hale was not an accident. It was the final consequence of years of protection. Cruz made a choice that would change her life. She plugged in a private drive, entered a passcode only she used, and began copying the file page by page. She saved the emails. She saved the memos. She saved the internal statistics showing that 72% of misconduct cases were dismissed over the last 8 years. She saved every detail that proved the system was designed to protect officers like Lawson at any cost. She copied until her screen reached the last document, a terse note from Chief Briggs himself instructing Crow to handle a complaint from a black teenager 2 summers earlier. The teen had said Lawson slammed him into a wall. The complaint disappeared the same day. Cruz copied that too. When the drive finished, she unplugged it, slipped it into her pocket, and exhaled with the weight of a woman who knew she had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. She walked past Briggs's office without looking inside. She walked down the stairwell instead of the elevator. She stepped into the cold air with the knowledge that she had just become the department's most dangerous threat because she held the truth. Across the city, the video continued to spread. Churches live-streamed it during evening gatherings. Community leaders organized vigils within minutes. Veterans set their profile pictures to Darius's uniform insignia, and thousands of strangers sent messages asking the same question: how could this happen to a man who served so faithfully? The answer did not arrive in words. It arrived on a flash drive in Cruz's pocket. It arrived in Camila's trembling upload. It arrived in Theo's recording, where his small voice captured not only the sound of the shot, but the sound of a child losing the world he knew. The video could not be stopped, and the truth now set loose began its march toward the reckoning no one in the department could escape. By sunrise, the streets of Chicago moved with a force no leader could control. And the first protest formed on 63rd Street, where a group of veterans gathered in silent formation, each one standing shoulder to shoulder in dress uniforms, their medals catching the early light as if they were calling Darius back into the world he had given everything to defend. And within minutes, teenagers, mothers, nurses, and retired soldiers joined them until the crowd stretched down the block in a wave of quiet grief. As the day progressed, silence broke into chants, and the chant came from Theo's trembling words in the video. "My dad said real soldiers never kneel to fear." The phrase spread through Englewood and into the Loop with breathtaking speed. Thousands echoed it, then tens of thousands. By noon, Michigan Avenue pulsed with a river of people holding signs that read, "His uniform was his crime," "Honor his service," and "Never kneel to fear." The city saw something it had not seen in generations: veterans marching beside students, nurses beside bus drivers, ministers beside Marines. People who had nothing in common except the belief that a man who served this country deserved better than a bullet in a parking lot. News helicopters hovered overhead as the march moved north, absorbing the anger and sorrow of a city waking up to its own reflection. Detective Isabella Cruz watched the protests from her apartment window with the flash drive held tightly in her hand. She knew the crowd did not yet understand the depth of what had been done to Darius, or how thoroughly the system had failed him. She knew a bomb was about to detonate inside the department, and she was holding the fuse. When she finally stepped outside, she walked with purpose toward a small newsroom run by independent journalist Theo Rivera. Theo greeted her with the steady calm of a man who had interviewed grieving families for decades, and Cruz placed the drive on the table between them with a soft, painful truth. "This is everything," she said. "If the world is going to fight for him, they deserve to know the whole story." Theo opened the files slowly, and as the pages scrolled across the screen, he exhaled in disbelief. 7 complaints against Officer Lawson, everyone dismissed, everyone altered by Captain Elias Crow, and dozens of identical cases across the department, all pointing to the same conclusion. Gross misconduct had become standard procedure, not exception. Cruz stood behind him, silent, as the truth filled the room like a heavy storm, unavoidable and suffocating. Theo looked up and nodded once, not with excitement, but with the sober recognition that the city would never be the same. At noon, Theo released the first leak, a summary of the 412 pages showing Lawson's undisclosed history of excessive force. The story exploded within seconds. The headline struck like a verdict. Officer who shot Colonel Hale had 7 prior complaints erased by internal affairs. News outlets across the country carried the report within minutes. National anchors interrupted breaking news. Chicago citizens read the documents on their phones in real time as they marched. The protest grew even larger. Veterans raised their uniforms higher. Teenagers lifted their phones to show images of the concealed complaints. Anger transformed into resolve. The city roared as one. Meanwhile, in a quiet hotel room on Michigan Avenue, 11-year-old Theo sat on the edge of a bed beside his Aunt Elena, still wearing the same clothes he wore when he watched his father fall. Reporters gently asked him if he wanted to say anything. He hesitated, his small hands twisting together until Elena whispered, "Speak from your heart." He lifted his chin and said, "My dad said real soldiers stand tall. He taught me to be brave." His voice cracked. He wiped his eyes. Then he added, "He said real soldiers never kneel to fear." The recording aired on every major network within 20 minutes. Protesters heard it on loudspeakers. They repeated it in waves that rolled down State Street like a command from a fallen leader. Theo's words became the pulse of the movement. Lawson, suspended with pay, hid inside his home on the Northwest Side as protests surged 3 blocks away. His wife packed bags for their children, their faces pale with fear as they listened to people chanting Darius's name. She confronted him with the first question no one in the department had dared to ask. "Why did you shoot him? He showed you his ID." Lawson had no answer. His mind replayed the moment again and again, looking for justification, but none came. The weight of the video pressed down on him. The weight of the files leaked online crushed the last illusion that he could hide. His wife left before sunset. She took the children with her. Lawson stood alone in his silent house, the distant echo of protest chants rising like a verdict through the night. Across the city, the mayor's office scrambled. Mayor Marisol Vega held an emergency meeting with her advisors as crowds blocked the entrances to City Hall. She wanted the protests to die down. She wanted the city to stabilize. She wanted to protect her political brand. She told her staff to find a legal angle to blame Darius for non-compliance. But every attempt failed. The video contradicted her. The documents contradicted her. The public contradicted her. Her power, once unquestioned, now seemed fragile under the weight of a truth she could no longer control. At Chicago Police Headquarters, Chief Donovan Briggs and Captain Elias Crow confronted the fact that the city was turning against them. Briggs demanded to know who leaked the files. Crow insisted they could still contain the damage, but their voices carried no confidence. They knew the walls were closing in. Briggs stared at the television as Theo's next leak rolled across the screen. Internal statistics showing that 72.5% of misconduct cases had been dismissed over the last 8 years. The number hit the city like a tidal wave. Protesters shouted it through megaphones. News anchors repeated it with disbelief. The number became a symbol of everything the department tried to bury. While the city shook, something remarkable unfolded inside the growing crowd. Veterans began distributing copies of Darius's service record. Teenagers carried posters of his medals. Elderly veterans saluted his photograph as if he were still with them. A line of active duty soldiers on leave marched silently down LaSalle Street with their uniforms pressed and their faces set with quiet determination. They carried no signs. They did not chant. They walked to show the public what honor looked like. Throughout the day, more people joined. Nurses from the Veterans Affairs, firefighters from neighboring districts, teachers who remembered Darius giving guest lectures on trauma care, strangers who watched the video and could not forget Theo's cry. By late afternoon, the march reached Michigan Avenue with a strength that shook the city to its core. The chants rose above the skyline. The police barriers strained against the weight of the crowd. And everywhere, in every direction, the same truth echoed. A nation had witnessed the death of a man who embodied duty, sacrifice, and courage, and now the nation demanded justice. As the sun set over the city, the protests showed no sign of fading. They grew brighter, louder, stronger. And the city understood that the death of Colonel Darius Hale was no longer a story. It was a turning point, a force that would not be silenced, a spark that would lead to a reckoning chartreuse far greater than anyone inside the department had ever imagined. Federal agents arrived before dawn as Chicago struggled to contain the force of its own outrage, and the FBI's quiet entry marked the first fracture in the blue wall that had protected the department for years. Because the moment agent stepped into the homicide unit and requested every document tied to the shooting, Chief Donovan Briggs understood that the ground beneath him had shifted forever. He tried to appear calm, but his voice carried strain as he insisted the investigation should remain internal. The FBI supervisor responded with a simple sentence that ended the argument. "The video speaks for itself, Chief. Agents collected Lawson's service weapon, seized the patrol vehicle, pulled digital logs, and removed entire computer towers from internal affairs." Staff stared as their screens went dark. A silence spread through the building as realization settled in. This case no longer belonged to Chicago. It belonged to the United States government. Detective Isabella Cruz arrived with steady resolve, knowing she carried something the FBI needed. When she placed the flash drive on the table, the lead agent opened the files and leaned back in his chair as the weight of the content pressed down on him. The documents told the story of a department conditioned to hide its own violence, files altered, complaints erased, patterns unmistakable. Cruz spoke softly, her voice carrying both caution and conviction. "If I stay inside this building, the truth dies with me," she said. "I am giving you everything because Darius deserves the full truth." The agent nodded and placed a protective detail on Cruz without hesitation. Cruz's choice carried enormous risk, but it transformed her into the central figure in a growing federal case. Across the city, journalist Theo Rivera prepared his next release, audio recordings from a whistleblower with access to the command staff. The recordings captured candid conversations between Chief Briggs and Captain Elias Crow, discussing how they had cleaned Lawson's record 5 separate times. The tone in the audio was casual, as if erasing evidence were part of daily routine. Theo released the files at noon, and the reaction was immediate. Television anchors replayed the audio every hour. Legal analysts called it damning. Protesters held speakers above their heads and blasted the recordings into the crowds. The trust between the city and its police leadership cracked in a single day. At Fort Knox, news of the scandal reached General Sophia Quinn, the 2-star general whose life Darius saved during a chaotic firefight that nearly ended her command. When she saw the video and recognized the man falling to the pavement, she felt something deep inside her break. She boarded a military transport to Chicago without waiting for clearance. Upon arrival, she walked straight into the Veterans Affairs and met Elena and Theo in a private room set aside for grieving families. She embraced the boy with a tenderness rare for someone of her rank and said, "Your father saved my life. I am here to honor him." Theo held onto her uniform sleeve with both hands, the gesture small but powerful. General Quinn then stepped before the press with steady composure and declared, "I will not allow Colonel Darius Hale's death to be buried. A man who saves lives should not lose his own at the hands of those sworn to protect." Her presence shifted the national conversation. A general had entered the fight. The military now stood beside the protesters. Meanwhile, Chief Briggs returned home to find his younger brother, Daniel Briggs, waiting on the porch in a wheelchair. Daniel was a double amputee Marine who credited Darius with saving his life years earlier. Daniel had watched the video. He had listened to the leaks. and he had recognized the man who pulled him out of burning debris. Tears streaked down his face as he pounded on his brother's front door, shouting, "He saved me! He saved me! Donovan! Donovan, how could you protect the man who killed him?" Neighbors emerged from their homes as Daniel screamed until his strength gave out, and an officer unfamiliar with the family called it in as a disturbance. Briggs stood at the window with tears forming, knowing that even his own family had turned against him. Inside the department, fear spread like a quiet contagion. Officers spoke in hushed voices. Supervisors avoided eye contact. No one trusted anyone. Some feared exposure. Others feared retaliation. A few feared the truth itself. Crow tried to maintain control, insisting the situation could be contained if they held their ground. But when he entered his office and found 2 FBI agents waiting with a subpoena, his confidence wavered. They seized his files. They seized his hard drives. They seized his handwritten notes. Crow attempted to object, but the agent cut him off with a calm, firm voice. "Captain, this is a federal civil rights investigation. Your cooperation is mandatory." Crow sat down, his hands trembling. Throughout the day, the protests grew louder. Veterans marched with renewed purpose now that General Quinn had spoken publicly. Teachers left classrooms early to join the crowds. Nurses from the Veterans Affairs walked down Michigan Avenue with posters showing Darius's medals. Theo's words from the video replayed on large screens set up by community groups. Every corner of the city echoed with the same painful truth. Chicago had killed one of its own heroes. By late afternoon, the mayor's office entered crisis mode. Mayor Marisol Vega held an emergency televised address. Her tone was stern, but hollow. She offered sympathy, but no accountability. She blamed miscommunication, community misunderstanding, and tensions inflamed by social media. The public rejected every word. Protesters responded with louder chants. Journalists pressed her on the leaked documents. She dodged every question. Her approval numbers collapsed. Her influence waned as the federal investigation gained strength. Hours later, the FBI held a quiet briefing with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Cruz's files and the leaked audio were now part of an official case. A federal prosecutor studied the evidence and said, "This is a pattern, not an accident. This goes far beyond one officer." The investigation was no longer about a shooting alone. It was about a city's system of silence. That night, General Quinn stood outside the Veterans Affairs with Elena and Theo as thousands gathered for a candlelight vigil. She placed her hand on Theo's shoulder as soft light flickered across the crowd. The boy's small face reflected the grief and strength of a nation. Quinn whispered, "Your father's story will be told, and the truth will stand." And for the first time since the shot that shattered his world, Theo believed her. Because the cracks inside the blue wall were no longer cracks. They were fractures spreading faster than anyone inside Chicago Police Headquarters could repair. The truth had broken through, and the reckoning had begun. The Senate chamber fell into a charged silence as the emergency hearing opened, and Senator Kai Rivera, a Marine veteran who had commanded men through war, looked out over the packed room with a gravity that made every camera adjust its focus. Because he understood that this was no longer a local tragedy, but a national reckoning brought to Washington by a 10-year-old boy with a recording that never should have existed. He began with a single, steady sentence. "Today, we seek the truth about the death of Colonel Darius Anthony Hale." The room bowed into stillness. Rows of veterans sat upright. Military families held hands. Reporters leaned forward. The air felt heavy with the weight of a nation watching itself in the mirror. Then the door to the chamber opened, and Theo Hale walked in. He wore a small dress blues blouse tailored to fit his frame, the same style his father once wore in Iraq. The fabric hung slightly loose on his shoulders, giving him the appearance of a child trying to carry a world far too heavy for his age. In his hands, he held the folded American flag from Darius's casket, the perfect triangle he refused to let go of, the flag he slept beside in the hotel room, the flag he now carried into the most powerful chamber in the country. Elena walked behind him, composed but pale, her hand steady on his back. General Sophia Quinn followed, her uniform pristine, her posture rigid with grief. When Theo reached the witness table, he carefully placed the flag before the microphone, as if presenting evidence. Then he reached into his pocket and set Darius's silver star beside it with slow, deliberate movement. The room inhaled. No one exhaled. Senator Rivera leaned forward. "Theo," he said softly, "you may speak when you are ready." The boy lifted his chin. His voice was quiet at first, but clear. "This is what my dad earned with his blood," he said, touching the medal. Officer Lawson would not even look at it. A wave of emotion spread through the chamber. A Marine veteran in the gallery wiped his eyes. A journalist lowered her camera for a moment to gather herself. Theo continued, voice trembling, but steady enough to reach millions. "My dad taught me to be brave. He taught me to stand tall. He told me real soldiers never kneel to fear. He was not a threat. He was my father." His words echoed across the room and through every television broadcasting the hearing live. Senator Rivera closed his eyes briefly, as if absorbing the pain of a nation in one breath. When Theo stepped down, the chamber stood in a spontaneous, silent salute that lasted nearly a full minute. Next came the testimony of Detective Isabella Cruz. For her safety, she appeared behind a screen with only her silhouette visible. Her voice, calm but subdued, carried the exhaustion of a woman who had lived too long. With truth, she could not speak. She detailed the misconduct statistics, the buried complaints, the falsified reports, and the explicit instructions from Captain Elias Crow to resolve without investigation. She described the night she found Lawson's full file and the fear she felt copying it, knowing she could lose her career or her life. When asked why she did it, Cruz answered quietly, "Because Colonel Hale deserved the truth. Because the city deserved the truth. Because I could no longer live with what I saw." Her testimony drew murmurs throughout the chamber. Crow's name, repeated again and again, became synonymous with corruption. Chief Briggs's directives surfaced in Cruz's recounting, painting a picture of a system designed to fail the vulnerable and protect the violent. As Cruz finished, Senator Rivera announced that financial evidence had just been released to the committee. Bank records displayed on the projection screens revealed that Mayor Marisol Vega had accepted more than $1 million in contributions and unreported payments from private security firms in exchange for suppressing misconduct cases that threatened their government contracts. The revelation stunned the chamber. Vega, once a rising political figure, watched from her office as every major network displayed the documents. Her staff froze. Her phone lit up with calls she refused to answer. Her future collapsed in the span of a single paragraph read into the record. The hearing continued as pressure built. Senators demanded answers from Chicago officials who struggled to maintain composure. One senator looked across the panel and said, "This is not one officer. This is a system." The phrase spread instantly. News banners repeated it. Protesters outside the Capitol shouted it into the cold air. The hearing had become more than testimony. It had become judgment. Then, halfway through the day, the doors opened again, and an unexpected figure entered. Officer Trent Lawson. He walked quickly down the aisle in a suit that did nothing to soften the tension around him. He was not scheduled to testify. He claimed he had come to correct the narrative. Whispers rippled through the chamber. Senators stiffened. Reporters raised their cameras. Security moved into position. Lawson reached the table and began to speak in a voice already failing under pressure. He repeated the phrases he had been taught. He claimed fear. He claimed confusion. He claimed a sudden movement despite the video proving otherwise. As he struggled through his statement, an aide rushed to Senator Rivera's side and whispered urgently. Rivera nodded once. He lifted his hand. "Officer Lawson," he said firmly. "Please stand." Lawson, confused, rose from his seat. At that exact moment, the side doors opened, and 2 United States Marshals walked in with determined purpose. The room froze. The cameras zoomed, and millions of viewers watched as the marshal announced, "Trent Lawson, you are under arrest for second-degree murder and violation of federal civil rights statutes." Lawson's face lost all color. He took a single step back. He tried to turn away. The marshal took hold of his wrist. The cuffs clicked. The entire nation saw the moment his career ended. The chamber erupted in gasps. Some cried out in relief. Others covered their mouths in shock. Elena held Theo close as the boy watched the man who killed his father being led away. Senator Rivera struck the gavel once and said, "Let the record show that accountability begins today." General Sophia Quinn testified next, her voice steady and solemn, as she recounted the day Darius saved her life. She described his courage, his discipline, la discipline, his loyalty. "We lost a hero," she said, "not in war, but at home, and this nation must decide what that means." The room fell into absolute silence. As the hearing closed, Senator Rivera delivered a final statement that would be quoted for years. "Justice does not return a life, but justice protects the living." Colonel Darius Hale gave his life to this nation. Today, this nation begins to repay that debt. The cameras continued rolling as he ended with a call that echoed from Washington to Chicago. "Let this be the day the system begins to change." And with those words, the reckoning moved from the streets into the halls of the United States government. Unstoppable and irreversible. The verdicts and confessions that followed the Senate hearing brought the city to a standstill because accountability arrived not in whispers or quiet settlements, but in a wave of consequences so swift and so sweeping that no one inside Chicago's power structure could outrun it. And the first to fall was Officer Trent Lawson, who stood before a federal judge in a silent courtroom as the jury returned with a unanimous decision of guilt for second-degree murder and violation of civil rights statutes, a verdict that carried the full weight of the nation's anger. The judge, firm and unyielding, sentenced him to 25 years with no possibility of parole. Lawson closed his eyes as the words landed with a force greater than any bullet he had ever fired. His wife attended the sentencing only to deliver a final message through her attorney. She was filing for divorce. Their children, already moved out of state, petitioned to change their last name. The man who once hid behind a badge, confident the system would protect him, now stood handcuffed, small and alone, as deputies led him away. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. There was no satisfaction, only solemn gravity. The second collapse came from the top. Chief Donovan Briggs, superintendent of Chicago Police, had spent years cultivating the image of a steady leader who defended his officers against public criticism. But as federal agents uncovered document after document showing deliberate cover-ups, altered reports, erased complaints, and falsified statistics, Briggs's future narrowed to a single path. The night before his scheduled testimony before the grand jury, he drove to a remote parking lot on the south side and left his engine running. He wrote a 14-page suicide note describing every buried case, every order he gave to protect officers like Lawson, every manipulation of public trust. He named victims the city had forgotten. He confessed to pressuring internal affairs to close files before investigations even began. He ended with a single sentence: "I failed this city." When police found him, the news spread in seconds. Protesters lit candles outside headquarters. Some cried. Some stood silent. Some walked away without speaking. His death did not slow the investigation. It accelerated it. Captain Elias Crow, head of internal affairs, architect of the erasures, and the man whose signature appeared on every sanitized file, became the next target. He watched the hearings from his home, aware that his name had already been spoken by crews, by journalists, by federal prosecutors. As agents entered his office to seize documents, Crow's confidence cracked. His trial was quick. Witness after witness testified about intimidation, altered statements, and pressure to mark cases unfounded. Cruz's files showed timestamps changed by Crow's direct instruction. A civilian described being threatened after filing a complaint. A junior officer testified that Crow routinely ordered him to delete body cam footage before entering evidence. Crow attempted to defend himself, claiming he protected the department, but the courtroom saw through it. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison for falsifying public records and obstruction of justice. Crow's pension was revoked. His family cut ties. He left the courtroom surrounded by marshals, shoulders slumped, his reputation erased with the same speed he once used to erase complaints. The political fallout struck next. Mayor Marisol Vega, who had once enjoyed a polished national profile, now faced a crisis large enough to drown her entire career. Federal prosecutors presented the bank records that emerged in the Senate hearing, evidence of unreported payments, political favors, and contributions routed through private security firms in exchange for burying misconduct cases that threatened lucrative contracts. Vega denied everything at first, insisting she was the victim of political sabotage, but her staff abandoned her. Her allies distanced themselves. The evidence was too clear. The day she was escorted out of City Hall by investigators, protesters lined the streets, silent and resolute. She resigned under pressure. Within weeks, she faced 18 felony counts, including bribery, conspiracy, and obstruction. Her attempt to negotiate a plea deal failed. She disappeared from public life and eventually fled to Florida under an assumed name, a stark fall for a woman who once dreamed of higher office. While the city watched these consequences unfold, the most unexpected act of responsibility came from the military. General Sophia Quinn, who had spoken at the Senate hearing with the authority of a commander and the sorrow of a woman who owed her life to Darius, stood before a live broadcast and announced her resignation. She removed her stars and placed them on a small oak table before her. Her voice was steady, but her eyes carried unmistakable grief. "I cannot hold these stars if this nation does not protect the men and women who earn them," she said. "I resign so Congress will act." Her decision stunned the Pentagon. Her departure ignited political pressure that no administration could resist. Congress responded within weeks, passing the Darius Hale Protection Act, a sweeping reform bill requiring mandatory body camera use for all officers receiving federal funds, implicit bias and de-escalation training, federal oversight boards with subpoena power, standardized reporting of all excessive force complaints, a national misconduct registry to track repeat offenders, and a new system for civilian review with the authority to refer cases directly to federal prosecutors. The bill passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. Veterans groups testified. Theo's words appeared in campaign speeches, and newspapers across the country called it the most significant civil rights legislation involving policing in a generation. Chicago, shaken by the magnitude of its own revelations, began its own transformation. The interim police superintendent launched hundreds of internal audits. Officers under investigation faced renewed scrutiny. The city reopened dozens of old cases. Families previously ignored were contacted and informed that their complaints were now part of a federal review. The public watched each step with caution, hope, and the memory of Darius's final moments seared into their minds. Through all of this, Theo remained at the center of the national conversation, though not by choice. He appeared once on camera, standing with Elena and General Quinn, to express gratitude for the public's support. He said only a few words, each one quiet but deeply felt. "Thank you for standing for my dad." He would want everyone to keep going. After that, Elena shielded him from the cameras. The boy had already endured enough. The city changed. The nation changed. But none of it returned Darius to the world he served. None of it gave Theo his father back. And yet, as the sentences fell and resignations shook the foundations of power, people across the country understood the same truth. Darius Hale's life did not end in silence. It ended in a reckoning that reached every corner of the system that failed him. And the reverberations of that reckoning were still spreading, preparing the final chapter that would transform grief into legacy and a child's heartbreak into a symbol that would endure for generations. 1 year after the shot that shattered a family and stirred a nation, the parade ground at the United States Military Academy Preparatory School stood filled with 4,000 cadets in perfect formation, each one standing tall in the crisp stillness of the morning, as if the earth itself had been instructed to hold its breath. Because today they were gathering not for a promotion or a graduation, but for a remembrance that transcended rank, uniform, and time. At the center walkway, small footsteps approached with a quiet resolve that drew every eye. 11-year-old Theo Hale walked forward, carrying the folded flag from his father's casket, the perfect triangle he would never unfold, the symbol he had held through nights of grief, terror, and unspoken hope. He held it to his chest with both hands, pressing it close as if the fabric itself steadied him. Elena walked beside him, her posture firm, her expression soft, a guardian who had carried him through every dark moment of the past year. When they reached the podium, Theo climbed the small step placed there for him and set the triangular flag upon the stand, stars outward, faces lifted skyward with the quiet dignity of a child who understood far too much. The grounds fell silent. The cadets, whose training demanded precision and discipline, did not move, their eyes fixed on the boy who lost his father to a bullet outside a Veterans Affairs hospital, the boy whose trembling voice had ignited the largest police reform movement in decades, the boy whose courage had reshaped national law. Theo looked out at the sea of uniforms, each one mirroring the uniform his father once wore. He took a slow breath. His voice emerged soft, steady, and solemn. "Before I speak," he said, "I ask for 1 minute of silence for my father, and for all who protect us." The command, spoken gently, carried the authority of pure sincerity. 4,000 cadets bowed their heads as one. The silence that followed felt sacred. Birds fell quiet. Wind stilled. The only sound was the soft rustle of flags along the perimeter. Elena placed a hand on Theo's back. General Sophia Quinn, now retired, stood behind them in civilian clothes, hands clasped, her grief woven into her strength. As the minute neared its end, Theo lifted his face and the grounds lifted with him. On his signal, 4,000 voices answered, firm and unified. "For those who protect us." The words echoed across the Hudson like a vow. Theo's speech continued in a tone that held both the innocence of childhood and the solemnity of a survivor. "My father believed in service," he said. "He believed in protecting people. He saved lives in war. He saved lives here at home. He taught me to stand tall. He taught me to be brave. He taught me that when something is wrong, you speak." He touched the flag lightly, as if reminding himself of its weight. "1 year ago, my father died because someone saw his skin before they saw his uniform, because someone feared him before they respected him. But my father stood tall until his last breath. And today, because of him, this country stands taller too. A ripple of emotion moved through the formation. Some cadets blinked back tears. Some tightened their posture. Some looked toward the horizon, steadying themselves against the swell inside their chest. Theo continued with quiet determination. My father told me real soldiers never kneel to fear. He lived that lesson, and I will carry it for him. Elena's hand pressed gently against his shoulder, a silent anchor. The ceremony shifted as the superintendent stepped forward to announce the creation of the Darius Hale Scholarship, a program funded by donations from veterans, citizens, and families across the country. Each year, he said, his voice resonant, 85 full scholarships will be awarded to children of minority veterans who seek to serve their country either in uniform or through community leadership. This is the legacy of Colonel Darius Hale, a legacy of courage, a legacy of sacrifice, a legacy of service. Theo listened with wide, steady eyes. The weight of the legacy did not overwhelm him. It strengthened him. Then a large photograph was revealed beside the podium. It showed Theo on the day of Darius's memorial service, clutching the triangular flag against his chest with both hands, as tears ran silently down his cheeks. The image was titled simply, The Triangle. Beneath it, engraved in brass, were the words now posted across every U.S. military installation. Never again. Cadets saluted the image. Journalists took photos. Veterans bowed their heads. The moment carried the power of a national promise. As the ceremony continued, the superintendent announced sweeping changes in Chicago. Disciplinary investigation rates had risen from 27% to 94%. Oversight committees now held subpoena power, and new laws ensured that every case of excessive force reached automatic review. These numbers were not statistics to Theo. They were proof that his father had not died in vain. When the superintendent stepped back, Theo moved to the microphone one final time. He spoke softly, yet his voice carried across the grounds. My father died on his feet so the rest of us could stand taller. The words lingered in the air, held steady by the collective strength of the thousands standing before him. When he finished, he stepped down from the podium with slow, careful steps. Elena placed her arm around his shoulders. He leaned into her with a trust that had grown over a year of pain and healing. They walked together across the field as the cadets parted to form a wide aisle. Every cadet saluted as Theo passed. Some saluted with trembling hands. Some saluted with fierce precision. All saluted with respect. As they reached the far end of the field, Theo looked up at Elena with a small, genuine smile. The first true smile she had seen since the day his father died. In that moment, she felt the quiet truth that anchors every story of loss. Healing does not erase pain, but it allows life to rise again through it. Darius was gone, but the shot that killed him woke a nation, reshaped its laws, and built a legacy that would endure long after flags faded and photographs aged. And in the steady steps of a boy carrying his father's folded flag, the nation saw not only grief, but hope, and the beginning of a new future his father never lived to see, but helped create. Thank you for listening. If this touched your heart, subscribe, like, and help this story reach more people.